Shield me from the cold, human. And I shall repay you. The howling wind cut through the forest like a knife. Mark pulled his thick jacket tighter around his body as he trudged through the knee-deep snow. The storm had come out of nowhere, turning his routine patrol of the northern border into a fight for survival. Just 2 more miles, he muttered to himself, squinting through the falling snow toward where his cabin waited. The forest ranger had seen many winter storms before, but this one was different. The air felt charged, almost electric. A flash of blue light in the distance made Mark stop in his tracks. It wasn't lightning, the color was wrong, and there was no thunder. He stood motionless, watching as the light pulsed 3 more times before fading away. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Every instinct told him to keep walking, to reach the safety of his cabin. But 20 years as a forest ranger had taught him that strange lights often meant trouble, lost hikers, crashed vehicles, or worse. With a resigned sigh, Mark changed direction and headed toward where he had seen the light. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind howled between the trees. Every step was a battle against the elements. 15 minutes later, Mark crested a small ridge and saw it, a shallow crater in the snow, about 20 feet across. In the center lay what looked like a pile of silver fabric. As he got closer, the pile moved. "Hello?" Mark called out, approaching cautiously. "Is someone there? Are you hurt?" The silver mass shifted again, and a slender arm emerged from the folds. Mark ran the last few yards, his heart pounding. When he reached the crater, he found a woman wrapped in what looked like a metallic blanket. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was shallow. "Ma'am? Can you hear me?" Mark knelt beside her and gently moved the covering from her face. He gasped. The woman was beautiful, but there was something strange about her. Her skin had a faint blue tint, and her features, though human-like, were somehow different, too perfect, too symmetrical. Her hair was white as the snow around them, but she looked young, maybe in her 30s. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes of the deepest violet. She looked at Mark with confusion, then fear. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here to help. My cabin is not far. Can you walk?" The woman's lips moved, but the words that came out weren't English or any language Mark had ever heard. She tried again, and this time he could make out what she was saying, though her accent was strange. "Cold," she whispered. "Too cold for me here." "I'll get you somewhere warm," Mark promised. He helped her to her feet, noticing how light she felt despite her height. She clutched the metallic blanket around her shoulders. "My name is Mark. I'm a forest ranger. What's your name? What happened to you?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the stormy sky, then back at Mark with those unusual violet eyes. "Nara," she finally said. "My name is Nara. I must get warm. Please." Mark nodded and wrapped his arm around her waist to support her. Together, they began the difficult journey through the snow toward his cabin. The storm was getting worse by the minute, and Nara seemed to grow weaker with each step. Just a little further, Mark encouraged her as his cabin finally came into view. It was a simple structure, built to withstand the harsh northern winters, with solar panels on the roof and a large stone chimney. By the time they reached the door, Nara was barely conscious. Mark had to carry her inside. He laid her gently on the couch, then rushed to build a fire in the wood stove. Within minutes, the cabin began to warm. Mark filled a mug with hot water and added a tea bag. When he turned back to Nara, she was sitting up, looking around the cabin with curious eyes. "Here," he said, offering her the mug. "This will help warm you from the inside." Nara took the mug in her slender hands. Now, in the light of the cabin, Mark could see her more clearly. The blue tint to her skin wasn't a trick of the light, it was real. And her ears were slightly pointed at the tips, just barely visible through her white hair. "What are you?" Mark asked before he could stop himself. Nara sipped the tea cautiously, then looked up at him with those violet eyes. "I am not from your world," she said simply. Mark sat down on the chair across from her. "You mean, you're not from this country?" "I mean I am not from Earth," Nara replied. Her voice was stronger now as the warmth of the cabin and the tea took effect. "My ship crashed in your forest during the storm. The cold, it is dangerous for my kind. We cannot survive in temperatures like these without protection." Mark stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. An alien? It seemed impossible, and yet, looking at her now, he could see the subtle differences that marked her as something other than human. "Why are you here?" "On Earth, I mean." Nara placed the mug on the small table beside the couch. "I did not intend to be here. I was traveling between star systems when my ship encountered an anomaly. I lost control and crashed. Most of my technology was damaged in the impact. Can you contact your people? Get help?" Mark asked. "Perhaps. But not until the storm passes. The atmospheric interference is too strong right now." Nara pulled the metallic blanket tighter around her shoulders. "If you protect me from the cold until then, I will reward you, human." "My name is Mark," he corrected her gently. "And you don't need to reward me. I'm just doing what anyone would do." Nara smiled, revealing teeth that were slightly sharper than a human's. "No, Mark. What you are doing is not common, even among your kind. And my people always pay their debts." A loud crash of thunder shook the cabin, making both of them jump. Nara's face paled to an even lighter blue. "What's wrong?" Mark asked, noticing her sudden fear. "That was not thunder," she whispered, getting to her feet and moving to the window. She peered out into the storm. "They have found me already." "Who has found you?" Nara turned to face him, her violet eyes wide with fear. "The ones who caused my ship to crash. The ones who hunt my kind across the stars. And now, Mark, they will hunt you too, because you have helped me." The cabin shook again as another thunder crashed outside, this one closer than before. Mark joined Nara at the window, peering out into the swirling snow. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, in the distance, a red light pulsed through the storm, the same shade of red as blood. "What do we do?" Mark asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm. "We must leave," Nara said. "Now. Before they track me to this location." Mark looked around his small cabin, his home for the past 5 years, then back at the strange woman with the violet eyes and blue-tinted skin. Every instinct told him to stay, to not get involved in whatever this was. But as another blood-red light pulsed in the distance, drawing closer, Mark knew he had already made his choice the moment he had carried Nara through his door. "I know these woods better than anyone," he said, grabbing his emergency pack from beside the door. "If we need to hide, I can keep us hidden." Nara placed her hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm. "Thank you, Mark of Earth. I will not forget this." As they prepared to venture back into the storm, neither of them noticed the small device that had fallen from Nara's metallic blanket. It lay on the cabin floor, blinking with a steady blue light, sending a signal out into the stars. Mark and Nara moved through the forest as quickly as the deep snow would allow. The storm had eased slightly, but the temperature was still dropping fast. Mark led the way, choosing a path that would be difficult to follow. "Stay in my footsteps," he told Nara, looking back to check on her. The alien woman nodded, her white hair almost invisible against the snow. She had wrapped the metallic blanket tightly around herself, but Mark could see she was struggling with the cold. "How far must we go?" she asked, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. "There's an old research station about 3 miles from here. It was abandoned years ago, but it should still provide shelter," Mark replied. He didn't add that it was also built like a fortress, with thick concrete walls and few windows. If they needed to defend themselves, it was their best option. A red light flashed in the sky behind them, followed by a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the trees. Mark pulled Nara behind a large pine tree, both of them pressing against the trunk as they looked up. "What is that?" Mark whispered. Through gaps in the pine branches, they saw a dark shape moving slowly across the night sky. It was roughly triangular, with pulsing red lights at each corner. It was unlike any aircraft Mark had ever seen. "A hunter ship," Nara said quietly. "They are searching for my energy signature." "Your what?" "Every being from my world gives off a unique energy pattern. It is how we identify each other." She touched the metallic blanket. "This shields most of my signature, but not all. They know I am in this area." The ship moved slowly away from them, its red lights casting an eerie glow on the snow-covered forest. Once it was out of sight, Mark and Nara continued their journey. "Who are they, Nara? Why are they hunting you?" Mark asked as they trudged through the snow. Nara was silent for so long that Mark thought she hadn't heard him. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible above the wind. "On my world, I am what you might call royalty. My family has ruled our planet for thousands of years." She paused, looking up at the stars barely visible through the clouds. "But there are those who wish to change that. A rival faction that believes my family's time has passed. So this is, what? Some kind of political assassination attempt?" Nara's violet eyes met his. "It is much more than that. My blood carries genetic memories of my ancestors. If I die, those memories can be extracted and used to locate something my family has protected for generations." "What is it they're looking for?" "A technology so powerful it could destabilize the balance between worlds." She looked away. "I cannot tell you more. It would put you in even greater danger." They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Mark's mind raced with questions, but he focused on their immediate survival. The temperature was still dropping, and Nara was showing signs of serious cold stress. "We need to move faster," he said, noting her blue-tinged lips had turned an alarming dark purple. "Can you run?" Nara nodded, though she looked doubtful. Mark took her hand and they began to jog through the forest, following a path only he could see in the darkness. Twice more they had to hide as the strange ship passed overhead, each time coming lower, searching more carefully. After what felt like hours, they reached the edge of a clearing. In the center stood a large concrete building, its windows dark, a layer of snow covering the roof. "The old research station." "There it is," Mark said, pointing. "Just a little." A bright red spotlight suddenly illuminated them, freezing them in place. The hum they had heard earlier was now a deafening roar as the hunter ship descended from the clouds directly above them. "Run!" Nara shouted, pushing Mark toward the building. They sprinted across the open ground, the red light following them like a predator tracking its prey. The main entrance to the research station was locked, but Mark knew another way in. He led Nara around to a side door that had been damaged by years of harsh weather. Just as they reached it, a beam of intense red energy struck the ground beside them, melting the snow instantly and scorching the earth beneath. Mark kicked the damaged door hard, breaking it open, and they tumbled inside as another energy beam hit the wall above them. The interior of the research station was dark and cold, but at least they were out of the wind. Mark pulled a flashlight from his pack and switched it on, revealing a dusty corridor lined with doors. "This way," he said, leading Nara deeper into the building. "There's a central room with no windows. It should be safer." They hurried through the dark hallways, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. Behind them, they heard a loud crash as something broke through the entrance they had used. "They're inside," Nara whispered, her voice tight with fear. Mark pulled her into a small room and closed the door. His flashlight revealed what had once been a computer lab, now filled with outdated equipment covered in dust. He switched off the light and they stood in total darkness, listening to the sounds of movement in the corridor outside. If they can track your energy signature, won't they find us anyway? Mark whispered. He felt Nara move closer to him in the darkness. Yes, but this building contains materials that may interfere with their sensors. It will buy us time. Heavy footsteps passed by the door, then moved away down the corridor. Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We need to find the central room, he whispered. Follow me, and stay close. They slipped out of the computer lab and moved in the opposite direction from the footsteps. Mark's years of exploring the abandoned research station were paying off as he navigated the dark corridors from memory. Finally, they reached a heavy metal door marked Main Control Room. It was locked, but Mark knew the code from his previous visits. He punched the numbers into the keypad, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside was a large circular room with a raised platform in the center. Dusty computer monitors lined the walls, and thick cables ran across the floor to the platform. What is this place? Nara asked, looking around in wonder. It was a government research facility. They were studying atmospheric phenomena, at least officially. Mark closed and locked the door behind them. But there were always rumors about what really went on here. Nara approached one of the dead computer terminals, running her fingers over the dusty keyboard. To Mark's astonishment, the screen flickered to life at her touch. How did you do that? He asked. The power's been off for years. Nara didn't answer immediately. She placed both hands on the computer, and the screen began displaying symbols that Mark didn't recognize. The alien woman's eyes were closed, and her face showed intense concentration. Nara? What are you doing? Her violet eyes opened, now glowing with an internal light. I can communicate with your technology. It is primitive, but useful. She turned to him, her expression serious. Mark, there is something I must tell you. Something I should have told you before. Before she could continue, an explosion shook the building. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the lights that had mysteriously come on flickered. They found us, Nara said, her hands still on the computer. But I'm not defenseless anymore. The computer screens around the room all lit up at once, displaying the same strange symbols. A mechanical voice spoke from hidden speakers, defense systems activated. Mark stared at Nara in amazement. What exactly are you? Nara turned to him, her violet eyes still glowing. I am more than just royalty, Mark. On my world, I am what you might call a sorceress. But my magic is what your people would call advanced technology. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. The hunters have breached the outer defenses, the mechanical voice announced. Inner defenses engaged. Nara looked at Mark, her expression both determined and afraid. I need your help for what comes next. Are you still willing to protect me? Mark thought about his quiet life as a forest ranger, now shattered by this encounter with something beyond his world. He thought about the cold, the hunters, and the mysterious woman who had brought danger to his doorstep. Then he nodded. I'm with you. Whatever comes next. The metal door to the control room began to glow red-hot as something powerful started burning through from the other side. The metal door glowed brighter as the hunters continued to burn through it. Mark looked around desperately for anything they could use as a weapon. The control room held nothing but old computers and equipment. Stand back, Nara commanded, her voice suddenly stronger than before. She raised her hands toward the door, her fingers splayed wide. The computers around the room hummed louder, and the lights grew brighter. What are you doing? Mark asked, watching as the air between Nara's hands began to shimmer. Using the station's power to create a defense field, she replied without looking at him. When they break through that door, they'll get a surprise. The door was now almost completely red, the metal beginning to melt at the edges. With a sudden crash, it burst inward, pieces of molten metal flying across the room. Mark ducked, but Nara stood her ground. 3 figures entered through the smoking doorway. They were tall and thin, dressed in black armor that seemed to absorb the light around them. Their faces were covered by helmets with dark visors, but Mark could feel their eyes on him. "Stay behind me," Nara whispered. The lead hunter stepped forward, raising a weapon that looked like a cross between a gun and a sword. It spoke in the same strange language Mark had heard from Nara when they first met. Nara answered in the same language, her voice cold and commanding. The hunter seemed surprised, taking a step back. "What did you say to them?" Mark asked quietly. "I told them who I am," Nara replied. "And what will happen to them if they continue this hunt?" The hunter spoke again, this time pointing its weapon directly at Mark. The message was clear even without understanding the words. "They want me to go with them," Nara explained. "They say they'll kill you if I don't." Mark's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "Don't do it. We can fight them." "I don't want to fight," Nara said. Then she raised her voice, addressing the hunters again in their language. Whatever she said made them hesitate. The three hunters conferred among themselves, their voices low and guttural behind their helmets. While they were distracted, Nara turned slightly toward one of the computers. Her hand moved almost imperceptibly, and the screen changed to show what looked like a building layout. "When I say run, head for the corridor on the right," she whispered to Mark. "There's a laboratory there with stronger defenses." Mark nodded, tensing his muscles to run. The hunters finished their discussion and turned back to face them. The leader raised its weapon again. "Now!" Nara shouted. She clapped her hands together and a blinding flash of light filled the room. Mark ran blindly toward the right corridor, hearing shouts and what sounded like electricity crackling behind him. He felt Nara grab his hand as they sprinted down the dark hallway. "In here," she said, pulling him through a doorway marked, "Advanced Research." The laboratory beyond was larger than the control room, with strange equipment Mark didn't recognize. Large glass chambers lined one wall, and complex machines filled the center of the room. "What is this place?" he asked, breathing hard from the run. Nara didn't answer. She was already at a control panel, her hands moving quickly over the surface. The room's lights came on, and machinery began to hum to life. "This facility wasn't just studying weather patterns," she said finally. "They were studying signals from space. Including signals from my people." Mark stared at her. "You've been here before?" "To Earth?" Nara nodded. "Not me personally. But my kind has visited your world many times over the centuries. We watch, we study, we learn. Why? What do you want from us?" "Nothing that you need fear." Nara's violet eyes met his. "My people believe in observation, not interference. We've watched humanity grow, make mistakes, learn from them." A crash echoed from somewhere in the corridor. The hunters were following them. "We don't have much time," Nara said, turning back to the control panel. "I need to access the communication array." "To call your people?" "Yes. There is a ship nearby, monitoring this region. If I can reach them, they can help us." Mark moved to the laboratory door and closed it, looking for something to barricade it with. "How long will that take?" "A few minutes, if I can get the equipment working properly." As he pushed a heavy cabinet in front of the door, Mark noticed a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. Curiosity pulled him toward it. He opened the top drawer and found folders labeled with dates going back decades. He pulled one out and flipped it open. Inside were photographs, reports, and what looked like interview transcripts. The photos showed objects in the sky, strange markings on the ground, and in one case, what appeared to be a being very similar to Nara. "You said your people just watch us," Mark said slowly, turning toward her with the folder in his hand. "But this looks like a lot more than watching." Nara glanced at the folder, then returned to her work on the control panel. "Some of my kind believe we should do more than observe. They've made unauthorized contact." "And the hunters? Are they also your kind?" "No." Nara's expression darkened. They are from a world that conquered by my people long ago. They seek revenge, and the technology one told you about. The barricaded door shuddered as something heavy slammed into it from the other side. Mark dropped the folder and looked around for a weapon, settling on a heavy metal pipe that had fallen from one of the machines. Nara, whatever you're doing, hurry. Almost done, she said, her hands dancing over the controls. The machinery in the room was fully active now, lights blinking and displays showing what looked like star charts. The door shuddered again, the cabinet in front of it sliding a few inches across the floor. Got it. Nara exclaimed. A beam of blue light shot up from a device in the center of the room, passing straight through the ceiling. I've sent the signal. My people will be here within minutes. The third blow to the door knocked the cabinet aside completely. The door burst open, and the 3 hunters entered the laboratory, weapons raised. Stay behind me, Nara said, moving to stand between Mark and the hunters. The lead hunter spoke, its voice now translated by the machinery Nara had activated. Surrender the human, princess. We have no quarrel with your kind. What do they want with me? Mark asked, gripping the pipe tightly. They think you know something, Nara replied without taking her eyes off the hunters. They think I've told you about the technology they seek. I don't know anything. They don't believe that. Nara raised her hands, and the air around her began to shimmer again. And even if they did, they would kill you as a precaution. The hunters spread out, surrounding them. Their weapons hummed with energy, the tips glowing red like the lights on their ship. Your people won't arrive in time, princess, the leader said. Surrender now, and we will make the humans' death quick. Mark saw Nara's shoulders slump slightly. She was tired, the cold and stress taking their toll on her strength. Whatever she had done in the control room had drained her further. She couldn't fight all 3 hunters. Without thinking, Mark stepped in front of her, raising the pipe in his hands. Mark, no. Nara cried. The lead hunter laughed, the sound distorted by its helmet. Brave but foolish, human. It raised its weapon and fired. Mark saw the burst of red energy coming toward him, too fast to dodge. He closed his eyes, expecting pain. Instead, he felt a push from behind as Nara shoved him aside. The energy blast hit her squarely in the chest, throwing her backward against the control panel. Nara! Mark shouted, rushing to her side. She lay still, her eyes closed, a dark burn mark on her chest where the blast had hit. The metallic blanket she had been wearing was torn and smoking. Mark looked up at the hunters, rage filling him. You'll pay for that. He charged at the leader, swinging the pipe with all his strength. The hunter raised its arm to block the blow, but seemed surprised by Mark's speed and force. The pipe connected with the side of its helmet, cracking the visor. The other 2 hunters fired their weapons, but Mark was already moving, dodging between the laboratory equipment. One blast hit a large machine, which exploded in a shower of sparks. The room began to fill with smoke. Mark used the confusion to circle back to Nara. To his surprise, she was conscious, though clearly in pain. Mark, she whispered. Help me up. He lifted her gently, supporting her weight. We need to get out of here. No, she said, her voice stronger than he expected. We need to finish this. She raised one hand toward the ceiling where the blue beam was still shining. The beam suddenly intensified, turning from blue to blinding white. The hunters cried out, covering their visors with their arms. What's happening? Mark asked, shielding his eyes. Nara smiled weakly. My people have arrived. The white light flooded the laboratory, forcing Mark to close his eyes. He heard the hunters cry out in alarm, their weapons clattering to the floor. When the light finally dimmed enough for him to see, Mark gasped. The ceiling of the laboratory had simply vanished. In its place was an opening to the night sky, where a massive ship hovered silently. It was beautiful, shaped like a giant silver lotus flower, its petals glowing with soft blue light. For beams of light shot down from the ship, each striking one of the hunters. The armored figures froze in place, unable to move or speak. The fourth beam enveloped both Mark and Nara, but instead of paralyzing them, it felt warm and comforting. "My people," Nara whispered, her voice weak but relieved. "They received my signal." "Just in time," Mark said, still supporting her weight. The burn on her chest looked serious, the skin around it turning a darker blue. "You need medical help." "Yes," she agreed, wincing in pain. "But first, there is something I must do." Nara straightened up with effort and approached the frozen hunters. She spoke to them in her language, her voice growing stronger with each word. Though Mark couldn't understand what she was saying, he could hear the authority in her tone. When she finished speaking, the hunters' helmets retracted, revealing their faces for the first time. Mark stared in shock. They looked almost human, but their skin was gray and their eyes were solid black without pupils. They had no hair, and their ears were just small holes on the sides of their heads. The leader of the hunters spoke, its voice surprisingly musical despite the harsh language. Nara listened, then nodded. "What did it say?" Mark asked when she returned to his side. "They have surrendered," Nara explained. "They know my people's ship is too powerful for them to fight against." "What will happen to them?" "They will be taken to my world and judged according to our laws." Nara looked up at the ship above them. "We should go. This building is not stable after the damage from our fight." As if to confirm her words, a section of wall collapsed in the corner of the laboratory. The white beam around them intensified, and Mark felt his feet leave the floor. He and Nara began to float upward toward the ship. "Whoa!" he cried out, instinctively grabbing Nara's hand tighter. She smiled at his reaction. "Do not be afraid. It is simply a gravity control field." They rose through the opening where the ceiling had been, the cold night air hitting them briefly before they entered the warmth of the alien ship. The hunters floated up after them, still paralyzed by the light beams. Inside the ship, Mark found himself in a large circular room with walls that seemed to be made of flowing liquid metal. Several beings similar to Nara moved around the space, working at what appeared to be control stations, though there were no visible buttons or screens. One of them approached, taller than Nara, with the same blue-tinted skin and white hair, but wearing elaborate silver robes covered in strange symbols. "My father," Nara said quietly to Mark. "The king of our world." Mark suddenly felt very self-conscious in his dirty, torn ranger clothes. He straightened his back as Nara's father reached them. The king spoke in their language, his eyes moving from Nara to Mark with obvious curiosity. Nara replied, gesturing to the burn on her chest and then to Mark. "He says thank you for protecting me," Nara translated. "And now our healers will tend to my wound." Two other aliens approached with what looked like a floating stretcher. Nara squeezed Mark's hand before lying down on it. "Wait with my father," she told him. "I will return soon." As the healers took Nara away, Mark found himself alone with the alien king. The moment should have been terrifying, but somehow it wasn't. There was something in the older alien's violet eyes that seemed kind and wise. The king gestured for Mark to follow him. They walked across the circular room to a smaller chamber with a window that looked out over Earth. From this height, Mark could see the vast forest stretching for miles, the storm clouds below them, and the curve of the planet on the horizon. It was breathtaking. "Your world is beautiful," the king said suddenly in perfect English, surprising Mark. "You speak my language?" "I speak many Earth languages. We have studied your world for centuries." The king smiled. "My daughter was on a diplomatic mission to another star system when her ship was attacked. We feared we had lost her until we received her signal." "Those hunters," Mark said. "What did they want?" The king's expression grew serious. "They sought knowledge of a technology my family has protected for generations. A technology that allows travel between dimensions, not just between stars." "That's possible." "Yes, but dangerous. In the wrong hands, it could destroy entire realities, not just worlds. The king looked at Mark with newfound respect. Nara told me you defended her, even though you knew nothing about her or our conflict. Why would you risk your life for a stranger? Mark thought about it for a moment. Because it was the right thing to do. She needed help. The king nodded slowly. This is why we have watched humanity with such interest. Despite your violent history, many of you show remarkable compassion and courage. Before Mark could respond, the door opened and Nara entered. Her injury was completely healed, not even a scar remained. She had changed into robes similar to her father's, though less elaborate. She looked healthier than Mark had seen her, her blue skin glowing with vitality. Mark, she said, smiling warmly. The healers have repaired my injury completely. I'm glad, he replied, surprised by how relieved he felt. So what happens now? You go back to your world. Nara looked at her father, who nodded slightly. Yes, I must return. But first, I promised you a reward for protecting me from the cold. Mark shook his head. You don't owe me anything. I was just doing what anyone would do. Not anyone, Nara said seriously. Few would risk themselves for a stranger, especially one not of their kind. She took a step closer. Mark, would you like to see the stars? He blinked in surprise. What do you mean? The king spoke. We offer you a position as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. You would travel with us, learn about other worlds, and represent humanity in discussions that will shape the future of many species. Mark stared at them in shock. Me? But I'm just a forest ranger. I don't know anything about diplomacy or space travel. You know more than you realize, Nara said gently. You showed kindness to a stranger. You defended someone weaker without thought for yourself. These are the qualities we value most. What about my life here? My job, my cabin. You may return whenever you wish, the king assured him. Time passes differently when traveling between stars. You could spend years among the worlds and return to find only months have passed on Earth. Mark looked out the window at his planet below. His quiet life as a ranger seemed very distant now. There is one more thing you should know, Nara added. We have discovered that humans possess certain abilities that other species do not. Qualities that make you uniquely suited for space travel and adaptation to other worlds. What abilities? Your emotions, your creativity, your ability to adapt and survive against all odds, the king explained. These are rare in the galaxy, and valuable. Mark took a deep breath, thinking about everything that had happened since he found Nara in the snow. His life had changed completely in just one day. And now they were offering him the stars. When would we leave? He asked finally. Nara smiled, her violet eyes shining. As soon as you are ready. Mark looked once more at Earth below, then turned back to Nara and her father. I'm ready now. The king nodded and touched a symbol on his robe. The ship hummed beneath their feet, and Mark felt a slight sensation of movement. What happens to the hunters? He asked, remembering the gray-skinned aliens. They will face justice, the king said. But without hatred or vengeance. That is our way. Nara took Mark's hand and led him back to the main chamber. The other aliens looked at him with curious but friendly expressions. He noticed that the hunters were gone, presumably taken to another part of the ship. Your first lesson as ambassador begins now, Nara told him with a smile. Tonight, we travel to the Galactic Council headquarters. Representatives from over 1,000 worlds will be most interested to meet the first human ambassador. Mark felt a moment of panic at the thought, but it quickly passed. He had faced alien hunters in a blizzard, he could face alien diplomats too. The ship rose higher, breaking through Earth's atmosphere. The stars came into view, clearer and more beautiful than Mark had ever seen them from the ground. Remember, Nara said softly beside him, this all began because you protected me from the cold. Mark smiled. Best decision I ever made. As Earth shrank behind them and the ship prepared to jump to faster-than-light travel, Mark realized that this wasn't just Nara's reward to him. It was humanity's first step into a much larger universe, and he was lucky enough to be taking that step. The stars beckoned, and Mark was ready to answer their call,